The cold night air filled the streets as James Carter walked down the sidewalk, his footsteps steady and unhurried. The streetlights above flickered softly, casting long shadows on the pavement. The distant hum of traffic mixed with the occasional sound of a car passing by. It was a quiet evening, just like any other. James adjusted the strap of his briefcase, shifting it slightly in his hand. He had just finished an important meeting and was heading home. He was dressed sharply, his navy blue suit perfectly tailored, his black leather shoes polished and clean. His expression was calm, focused. It had been a long day, but he was satisfied with how things had gone. As he turned the corner onto a less crowded street, a sudden noise broke the silence, a sharp screech of tires. Then, the blaring sound of a police siren. James slowed his steps and turned his head slightly. A black and white police car pulled up fast, stopping just a few feet away from him. The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark street in rapid pulses of color. Before James could react, two police officers jumped out. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. His uniform was neat, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. His name tag read Officer Bradley. His partner, Officer Miller, had a tense expression, his hand resting on his holster. "Hey, stop right there." Bradley's voice was sharp, commanding. James stopped, his brow furrowed in confusion. His grip on the briefcase tightened slightly. He had done nothing wrong, yet something in the way the officers approached made his heartbeat quicken. "Is there a problem, officers?" His voice was calm but firm. The officers exchanged a glance before Bradley spoke again. "We got a report about a robbery nearby. The suspect matches your description." James blinked. "A robbery?" He let out a small breath, shaking his head. "That's a mistake. I just left a meeting and was heading home." Miller took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Where were you an hour ago?" James kept his posture straight. "At the Grand Hotel, Conference Room B. You can check with the staff." Bradley crossed his arms. "Got any proof?" James exhaled, reaching toward his pocket. "I have my phone. I can show you my emails." "Don't move." Miller's voice turned sharp, his hand tightening around his holster. James froze. His hands remained still in the air. A tension filled the space between them, thick and heavy. A few people on the sidewalk slowed their steps, watching the scene unfold. "I'm just getting my phone," James said, his voice careful, controlled. Bradley didn't respond. Instead, he moved forward in one swift motion, grabbing James' arm. Before James could react, he was pushed roughly against the police car. The cold metal pressed against his chest. The snap of handcuffs followed. James took a deep breath, his pulse hammering against his ribs. His briefcase slipped from his hand, landing on the ground with a soft thud. The silver locks gleamed under the streetlights. "Officers, please," he said, his voice still calm despite the situation. "You're making a mistake." "Yeah, we'll see about that," Bradley muttered, tightening the cuffs around James' wrists. The murmurs of onlookers grew louder. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Some shook their heads. Others whispered among themselves. A woman nearby, wearing a red coat, stepped forward slightly. "He didn't do anything," she said, her voice uncertain but concerned. Bradley shot her a glance. "Step back, Mom. This is police business." Miller opened the back door of the squad car. "Get in." James closed his eyes for a brief moment before exhaling slowly. Without resistance, he stepped into the car. The door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed in his ears. The world outside the car seemed distant now. The flashing lights, the murmurs of the crowd, the cold night air, all of it felt far away. James sat still, his hands resting in his lap, the metal cuffs digging into his wrists. He had been in difficult situations before. He had faced challenges, obstacles, but something about this moment felt different. Outside, Bradley picked up the briefcase and gave it a glance before tossing it onto the front seat. Miller got into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror to glance at James. "Let's take him in," he muttered. Bradley nodded, closing his door with a thud. The car engine rumbled to life, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb. The streetlights outside blurred as they moved through the city. James remained quiet, his mind steady. He had nothing to fear. He knew the truth, but he also knew that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. The officers didn't know who he was. Not yet. But soon they would. The wedding hall was filled with beauty and joy. Golden chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a soft glow over the guests seated in neat rows. White lilies lined the long red carpet leading to the altar, where Michael Carter stood in an elegant black tuxedo. His heart was beating fast, but it was the good kind of nervousness, the kind a man feels before marrying the woman of his dreams. Vanessa Brooks, his soon-to-be wife, was everything he had ever wanted. She was beautiful, kind, and charming. She had walked into his life a year ago and changed everything. For the first time since his late wife passed away, Michael felt happy again. He believed that today would be the start of a new and wonderful chapter in his life. The guests were excited, whispering to one another about how perfect the couple looked together. Some women dabbed their eyes with tissues, already emotional before the ceremony had even begun. The music started, signaling that the bride would be walking down the aisle any moment now. The anticipation grew. Then, just as everyone turned to watch Vanessa make her grand entrance, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall burst open with a loud bang. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, and whispers broke out. A young woman stood in the doorway, panting as if she had been running for miles. She wore jeans and a gray hoodie, completely out of place in a room full of people dressed in their finest clothes. Her curly hair was slightly messy, her face flushed, and her eyes, her dark, determined eyes, were locked onto the man at the altar. Michael's heart sank. It was his daughter, Olivia. She took a step forward, then another. Her breathing was uneven, but her voice was strong and clear when she spoke. "Dad, stop. You can't marry her." A stunned silence fell over the hall. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the entire wedding. Michael's eyebrows furrowed. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing?" Whispers filled the room. Guests exchanged confused looks. Some shook their heads, unable to believe what was happening. Vanessa, standing near the entrance, forced a small, nervous laugh. She turned to Michael, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "She's just upset," she whispered softly. "It's okay. She'll calm down." But Olivia wasn't calming down. If anything, she was getting stronger. She marched forward, stopping right in front of her father. "No, Dad," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "This isn't a mistake. You have to listen to me." Michael sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. His daughter had never been fully comfortable with his relationship with Vanessa, but this was too much. "Olivia," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "this is not the time or place for this. We will talk later." "There won't be a later," Olivia snapped. "Not if you marry her. You don't know who she really is." A chill ran down Michael's spine. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Vanessa stiffen slightly, just for a second. Michael turned fully to Olivia, his voice sterner now. "I understand you're upset, but this is my wedding day. Why are you doing this?" Olivia's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from frustration. "Because I love you," she said. Her voice was softer now, but still urgent. "And I can't let you walk into this blind." Michael was about to argue, but Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. "Please, Dad," she whispered, "just read this." For a long moment, he didn't move. He could feel every eye in the room watching him, waiting for his reaction. His whole body was tense. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the paper. As he unfolded it, the room felt even quieter, like the entire world was holding its breath. His eyes scanned the words. Then he stopped. His heart dropped. The words on the page blurred for a moment as shock hit him. He blinked hard and read them again. His hand shook slightly as he gripped the paper tighter. The guests watched in confusion as Michael's face turned pale. Vanessa took a small step forward, her voice light, almost teasing. "Michael," she said, "what is it?" But Michael didn't respond. He couldn't, because in his hands he was holding a criminal record. And the name at the top of the document was not Vanessa Brooke. It was Melanie Hayes. Michael stood frozen, his fingers gripping the paper tightly. His eyes moved over the words again and again, but his mind refused to believe what he was reading. The room around him seemed to fade, the excited whispers of the wedding guests turning into distant noise. This had to be a mistake. His heart pounded as he forced himself to read the name once more. Melanie Hayes, not Vanessa Brooks. His fiancée's name was supposed to be Vanessa Brooks. That's the name he had heard for the past year, the name on all their wedding invitations, the name of the woman he was about to marry. But the document in his hands told a different story. Michael's throat went dry. His fingers trembled. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Olivia's. His daughter was staring at him with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not defiance, but pleading. "Dad, please," Olivia whispered. "You have to believe me." A heavy silence filled the wedding hall. The guests, dressed in their finest clothes, were sitting on the edge of their seats. Some exchanged confused glances, while others leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. Vanessa's soft voice broke the silence. "Michael," she said gently, stepping closer. "What is it?" Michael turned to her slowly. His mind was spinning. He wanted to ask her, wanted to hear her say it was all a misunderstanding. But before he could speak, Olivia took a step forward. "She's lying to you," Olivia said firmly. "She's not who she says she is." Vanessa blinked, her lips parting as if she was struggling to find words. Then she let out a small, nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "Michael, she's just upset. She's never accepted me. And now she's making up stories to ruin our wedding." Michael wanted to believe Vanessa. He wanted to dismiss Olivia's claims as nothing more than a desperate attempt to stop the wedding. But he couldn't ignore the document in his hands. His voice was rough when he spoke. "Is this true?" Vanessa's smile faltered. "Michael," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "You know me. We've spent a whole year together. I love you." Michael didn't pull away, but he didn't take her hand either. His body felt tense, his chest tight. He looked at Olivia again. His daughter's face was filled with frustration. "Dad, please don't let her fool you," Olivia said. "This isn't just about a fake name. She has a past, a dark one." Vanessa's body stiffened. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but Michael saw it. "Michael," Vanessa said quickly, "whatever she's telling you, it's a lie." Olivia took another step closer, her voice shaking but determined. "No, it's not," she said. "I looked into her background. I found records. She's been married before." A loud murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests gasped, while others whispered among themselves. Michael's heart pounded harder. Vanessa's eyes widened. "That's not true," she said quickly. "She's making things up." Olivia shook her head. "No, I'm not." Her last fiancé disappeared 2 days before their wedding, just like this one. Michael felt like the ground had been pulled from under him. He turned to Vanessa, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me that's not true." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked afraid. The wedding hall was completely silent. No one moved. No one even breathed. Michael's head spun. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the late-night talks, the laughter, the future they had planned. Was it all a lie? He wanted to believe Vanessa, but deep inside, something felt wrong. His grip tightened around the paper in his hand. He had spent years building a life, raising Olivia, trying to heal from the past. He had promised himself that he would never be careless, that he would protect his family. And now, here he was, standing in front of a woman who might not be who she claimed to be. Vanessa's voice trembled. "Michael, please. I love you." Michael stared at her. He wanted to believe those words. But Olivia was looking at him with eyes full of truth. He took a slow step back. His voice was quiet but firm. "I need answers." Vanessa's face paled. For a second, she stood completely still. Then, suddenly, she turned and ran. Gasps filled the hall. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He barely had time to process what had happened before Olivia shouted, "Dad, don't let her get away." And just like that, Michael's legs moved before his mind could think. He ran after her. Michael's heart pounded as he ran. His polished wedding shoes slammed against the marble floor, but he didn't stop. He pushed past guests, rushed through the open doors, and followed the sound of hurried footsteps. Vanessa, or Melanie, or whoever she was already halfway across the parking lot. Her wedding dress, once so elegant and perfect, was now a blur of white as she ran, lifting the hem to keep from tripping. Michael's breath came in short gasps, but he kept going. "Stop," he shouted. But Vanessa didn't stop. His mind raced. Everything felt unreal. One moment, he had been standing at the altar, ready to start a new life. The next, his daughter had exposed a terrible secret, and now his fiancée was running from him like a criminal. A few guests had followed, standing at the doors of the hall, watching in shock. Olivia was right behind him, her voice loud and desperate. "Dad, don't let her get away." Michael pushed himself harder. He was older, but he wasn't going to lose her. Not now, not without answers. Vanessa reached the far end of the parking lot. A black car was waiting there. The driver, a man in dark glasses, looked straight at Michael before throwing the door open for her. This was planned. Michael's stomach twisted. She had an escape ready. She had always been prepared for this moment. "Vanessa," he called again. "Tell me the truth." She turned just as she reached the car. For a second, their eyes met. And for the first time, Michael saw it. The real her. No softness, no love, no warmth, just cold calculation. Then she jumped into the car. The engine roared to life. The tires screeched against the pavement. The car shot forward. Michael lunged. His hands grazed the door handle. But it was too late. The car sped off, disappearing down the street. Michael stumbled to a stop, breathless. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His mind was spinning. What had just happened? Who had he almost married? Behind him, Olivia caught up, panting. "She's gone," she whispered. "She got away." Michael clenched his fists. His heart was still hammering. "We need to call the police," he said. Olivia nodded. "We should have done that before." Michael turned back toward the wedding hall. The guests were still standing outside, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, others confused. He didn't care. He needed answers. Inside, the hall that had once been filled with celebration now felt empty. The flowers, the candles, the music, it all seemed meaningless now. Michael pulled out his phone and dialed. The ringing felt like it lasted forever. Then, a voice. 911. "What's your emergency?" Michael took a deep breath. "My fiancée." He stopped, corrected himself. "A woman named Vanessa Brooks, but possibly Melanie Hayes, just fled from our wedding. I need help. I think she's dangerous." There was a pause. Then the operator asked, "Did you say Melanie Hayes?" Michael's blood turned cold. "You know that name." Another pause. Then the operator's voice lowered. "Sir, you need to stay where you are. Officers are on their way. Do not go after her." Michael gripped the phone tighter. "What's going on?" "I can't say over the phone," the operator said. "Just stay put." Michael lowered the phone slowly. He felt Olivia watching him, worry written all over her face. "Dad," she asked, "what did they say?" Michael's voice came out quieter than he expected. "They know who she is." A cold silence stretched between them. And in that moment, Michael realized something. This was bigger than he thought. Michael's hands felt numb as he lowered the phone. His heart was still racing from the chase, but now there was something else creeping into his chest. Fear. The police knew Vanessa's real name. They didn't just react with confusion or curiosity. They were alarmed. He turned to Olivia, who was staring at him, her eyes full of worry. "Dad," she asked again, "what did they say?" Michael swallowed hard. "They know who she is." Olivia's lips parted slightly. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Michael admitted, "but it's not good." The weight of his words sank between them like a stone. Around them, wedding guests whispered in hushed tones, their once cheerful faces now pale with concern. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens broke through the silence. Michael turned toward the entrance of the hall. The police were coming. 2 black and white patrol cars pulled up to the curb, their tires screeching against the pavement. The flashing red and blue lights painted the hall's golden decorations in harsh, flickering colors. The doors swung open, and 3 officers stepped out quickly. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp gaze, walked straight toward Michael. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the wedding hall lights. "Michael Carter?" he asked in a firm voice. Michael nodded. "Yes." The officer, whose name tag read Detective Harris, glanced around the wedding hall before locking eyes with Michael. "Where is she?" he asked. Michael exhaled. "She ran. She got into a black car and left. I tried to stop her." Detective Harris's jaw tightened. He turned and signaled to the other officers. "Send out an APB. Black sit-in. Possible suspect. Melanie Hayes." Michael felt his chest tighten. They didn't call her Vanessa. They called her Melanie. That meant Olivia was right. That meant the woman he almost married was hiding something serious. Michael took a deep breath. "Detective," he said, his voice uneven. "Who is she? What has she done?" Detective Harris studied him for a moment. Then he sighed. "Mr. Carter, you're lucky your daughter stopped you today." Michael frowned. "Why?" The detective's voice was grave. "Because Melanie Hayes is wanted in 2 states for fraud, identity theft, and suspected involvement in a disappearance case." Michael's heart stopped. He felt like the ground had been pulled from under him. "A disappearance," he repeated, his throat dry. The detective nodded. 3 years ago, a man named Richard Lane was engaged to marry her. Just 2 days before their wedding, he vanished. His body was never found. Michael staggered back a step. His mind struggled to catch up. 3 years ago, another wedding, another fiancé, and he disappeared. Michael's hands began to shake. That could have been him. The realization sent a cold chill down his spine. Olivia stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "So she was going to do the same thing to my dad." The detective's jaw tightened. "We don't know for sure, but she's dangerous, and now she's running." Michael felt sick. How could he have been so blind? He had trusted Vanessa. No, Melanie, with his heart, his future. He had believed in the love they shared. And all this time, she had been lying to him. He clenched his fists. "We have to find her," he said. The detective nodded. "And we will." One of the officers approached. "Detective, we've got traffic cameras tracking the vehicle. It was last seen heading west on the highway." Detective Harris turned back to Michael. "Mr. Carter, we need you to come with us. You might have information that can help us track her down." Michael hesitated for only a second before nodding. This wasn't over. Not yet. The chase had begun. Michael sat in the back of the police car, staring out the window as the city lights passed by in a blur. His mind was still trying to process everything. Just hours ago, he had been standing at the altar, ready to start a new life. Now he was in the middle of a police investigation, chasing a woman he had almost married, a woman who had lied about everything. Next to him, Olivia sat silently, her fingers gripping her phone tightly. She had been the first to see the truth, the first to warn him. He had almost ignored her. He had almost walked straight into the biggest mistake of his life. Detective Harris drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road. After a long moment, he spoke. "We got something," he said. Michael turned to him. "What?" "We tracked the car she escaped in," Harris explained. "It was rented under a false name, but the driver, he's someone we've been watching for a while. Name's Daniel Reed, small-time criminal, known for helping people disappear." Michael's chest tightened. "Disappear?" Harris nodded. "Fake passports, cash under the table, stolen identities. If she's with him, she's planning to vanish." Michael swallowed hard. "So how do we stop her?" The detective's eyes darkened. "We might already be too late." Michael felt a rush of panic. He couldn't let her escape, not after everything she had done. Then Olivia spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. "No, she's still here." Michael and the detective turned to look at her. Olivia held up her phone. "I checked her credit card records. She booked a hotel room." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "She used her real card." Olivia shook her head. "A fake one. But I traced it back to her. She's at the Grand Oak Hotel." Harris's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "That's less than 15 minutes from here." Michael felt a surge of energy. They could still catch her. The detective pressed his foot on the gas, and the car sped through the streets. The Grand Oak Hotel was tall and modern, its glass doors reflecting the city's streetlights. It was the kind of place where people checked in when they didn't want to be found. Harris parked a block away. "We go in quiet," he instructed. "She can't know we're here." Michael nodded, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Olivia stayed close to his side. Inside the hotel, the lobby was nearly empty. A man in a suit stood behind the front desk, barely looking up as they walked in. Harris flashed his badge. "Room 412, he said simply. The man hesitated, then nodded toward the elevators. "She checked in an hour ago." Michael clenched his jaw. She was still here. They stepped into the elevator. Each second felt heavier than the last. When the doors opened, they moved carefully down the hallway. Harris signaled for silence. They stopped in front of room 412. Michael's heart pounded. Harris raised his hand and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "Vanessa, Melanie, we know you're in there." Silence. Then a shuffling noise inside. Michael's breath caught. She was in there. And she was trying to escape. Harris nodded to the officer beside him. "Stand back." The officer took a step forward and slammed his shoulder against the door. The wood splintered, and the door flew open. Michael's eyes darted around the room. The bed was unmade. The window was open, and Vanessa was gone. Harris cursed under his breath. "She knew we were coming." Michael rushed inside. His eyes scanned the room. Then he saw it, a small black notebook on the nightstand. He picked it up. His hand shook as he flipped through the pages, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Inside were names, dates, locations. Michael's name was there. So was Richard Lane's, the man who had disappeared. Michael's breath came in short gasps. She had planned this, all of it, and now she was one step ahead again. Michael's hands trembled as he stared at the black notebook. His name was there. His name, along with dates, details, and other men's names. His stomach twisted. How many others had there been? How many had disappeared before him? Beside him, Olivia looked over his shoulder. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Dad," she whispered, "this was all planned. From the beginning." Michael swallowed hard. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stay steady. He couldn't fall apart now. Not when they were so close to the truth. Detective Harris grabbed the notebook from Michael's hands and flipped through it quickly. His expression darkened. This is evidence. She's been doing this for years. Michael turned toward the window. The curtain swayed gently, the cool night air slipping through the open gap. His heart pounded. She had escaped. Again. Harris moved toward the door, speaking into his radio. Suspect has fled the scene. Possible exit through the fire escape. Need backup now. Michael's jaw clenched. She won't get away, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Olivia grabbed his arm. Dad, please, let the police handle it. But Michael couldn't just stand there. Not after everything she had done. Not after what she had planned for him. He turned back to Harris. Where would she go next? The detective sighed. She's on the run. She'll need a way out of the city. Michael thought for a second. Then it hit him. The train station. She mentioned it once, he said quickly. A long time ago. She said if she ever wanted to disappear, she'd take the night train out of town. Harris nodded. It's worth checking. He turned to the officers. Let's move. Michael didn't wait. He was already heading for the door. This ends tonight. The train station was dimly lit, the cold air thick with the smell of metal and old wood. The platform was mostly empty, except for a few late-night travelers waiting for their trains. Michael's eyes scanned the crowd. His pulse was racing. Then he saw her. Vanessa, Melanie, stood near the far end of the platform, wearing a dark coat, her wedding dress now gone. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes shifting nervously. She held a small bag, gripping it tightly. Michael took a slow step forward, then another. And then, before she could turn, Vanessa, he called. She froze. For a second, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. Their eyes met. Michael saw something flicker across her face. Shock, then fear, then something else. Something colder. She smiled. Michael's fists clenched. It's over, he said, his voice shaking with anger. The police are coming. Vanessa tilted her head, as if amused. Michael, she said softly, you always were too trusting. Michael took another step closer. You used me. She sighed, shaking her head. Don't take it personally. Michael's chest burned. What did you do to Richard Lane? Her smile faded. You don't want to know. Michael took another step, his hands shaking. Where is he? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, she leaned in slightly and whispered, Gone. Michael's breath caught. She did kill him. His stomach twisted. He had almost been next. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from behind. Police officers rushed onto the platform. Vanessa's eyes darted to the side. Her fingers tightened around her bag. Then she ran. Michael lunged forward, grabbing her wrist before she could escape. She gasped, twisting in his grip. Let me go. Michael held on tighter. Not this time. She struggled, her nails digging into his skin. But Michael didn't let go. Then Harris was there. The detective grabbed her other arm, pulling her away from Michael. Officers surrounded her, pinning her hands behind her back. Melanie Hayes, Harris said coldly, you're under arrest. Vanessa, Melanie, stopped struggling. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. Michael watched as the police took her away, his breath still heavy. It was over. Finally over. Olivia appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. Dad, she whispered, you're safe now. Michael took a deep breath, his chest still tight. But as he looked at his daughter, he finally felt it. Relief. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. The night was quiet now, but his heart was still heavy. Everything that had happened felt like a dream, a nightmare that he had just woken up from. The wedding, the truth, the chase, and now it was over. Vanessa, Melanie, was gone, arrested. She wouldn't hurt anyone else again. But even though she was behind bars, Michael still felt the weight of it all pressing on his chest. How had he been so blind? He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. He felt exhausted, yet sleep refused to come. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Dad?" It was Olivia. Michael straightened up. "Come in," he said softly. The door opened, and Olivia stepped inside. She was wearing an old hoodie, her hair tied up messily. She looked tired too, but there was something steady in her eyes, something strong. She walked over and sat beside him on the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, yet filled with things left unsaid. Then Olivia exhaled. "How are you feeling?" Michael let out a small, dry laugh. "I don't even know," he admitted. Olivia nodded. "Yeah, me neither." They sat in silence again. Michael turned to look at her. "How did you know?" he asked suddenly. "How did you know she wasn't who she said she was?" Olivia hesitated, then sighed. "It was little things," she said. "The way she avoided certain questions, the way she changed details about her past. And when I tried to look her up, it didn't add up. Something just felt wrong." Michael swallowed hard, and I didn't see it. "Dad," Olivia reached for his hand. "She fooled you. She fooled a lot of people." Michael shook his head. "But you didn't let her fool you." He looked at his daughter with deep regret. "And I almost didn't believe you." Olivia gave him a small smile. "You did, when it mattered most." Michael's chest tightened. She had saved him. If it weren't for her, he might have ended up like the others. He turned and faced her fully. "Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of you." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "You're strong," Michael continued. "You're smart. You stood up for me, even when I didn't listen. You saved me." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "You would have done the same for me," she whispered. Michael squeezed her hand. "Always." For a moment, they sat there, father and daughter, their hands tightly clasped. Finally, Olivia let out a breath and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think we both need some sleep," she murmured. Michael chuckled softly. "Yeah." But as he sat there, feeling the warmth of his daughter beside him, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, they would always have each other.